Hi, everyone. I want to share a clip from a recent interview with Doug Ellenoff, one of the architects behind democratizing private company investment in the US. Before 2012, these investments were largely restricted to the wealthy and well-connected. Doug's leadership in crafting the Jobs Act, including countless hours fighting for change in Washington, opened new pathways for everyday investors. Watch as he explains how this regulatory battle created new opportunities for both entrepreneurs and investors alike. Thanks for tuning in.
Its destiny. But what crowdfunding did, which I'm so proud of, is it reversed 70 years of securities law. It used to be, if you want to raise money for an opportunity, you could not do a public outcry. Hi, I'm Doug Ellenoff. I've got this new idea. I want you to give me money. That's a public offering, and you would go to jail over that. What crowdfunding enables you to do through a regulated portal, regulated by FINRA, who regulates broker-dealer activity in this country, and the methodology by which you can do this, you have to speak to counsel to understand how to do it, but you post your idea or business online through one of these regulated portals, and then investors are taken through a process to verify who they are, how much money they can invest in a very measured way. You can't, as a retail investor, throw your net worth at a small opportunity and take a shot. That's not what this is about. This is about giving people an opportunity, a controlled opportunity, not more than 10% of their assets, a few $1,000s to participate. The thought process was start off as doing it like a friends and family round, not in the backyard in the barbecue, but in this public forum. And then hopefully 10, 15, 20 years later, and now we're 10 years later, you can raise a much more meaningful sum of money for a further along venture opportunity called a Series C or D round. We haven't gotten there yet. It's going to take longer for this to happen. But to your point, many thousands of companies have availed themselves of Reg CF crowdfunding. There are different types of crowdfunding. There's retail crowdfunding. There's accredited investor crowdfunding. There's another thing called Reg A plus crowdfunding, which is quite an oddity. But these are all programs under the Obama administration, to give credit to that administration, that enables retail investors to participate in venture opportunity, responding exactly to the point that you and Jay Clayton were making, that we want people to have earlier access to taking a shot in venture opportunities, even if, and most likely they will, lose money.
How hard was it to get this stuff done? It just sounds like the most horrendously difficult process because it required an act of Congress, didn't it?
So the Jobs Act is 100% congressionally driven and presidentially mandated. And here I've spent a decade working within the existing SEC created rules. It was not Congress that created Rule 419, it was the SEC. And it was a lot of anguish that went into helping formulate the better ways to do SPACs from 2002 to 2012 as an example, because 2012 is when crowdfunding comes along. I see crowdfunding, this guy, Woody Neese, and his partner, Jason Best, who went down to Washington, walked the halls of Congress, and got Patrick McHenry, who's going to retire this year from the head of the House Financial Services, who's been a wonderful advocate for crowdfunding. And they got bipartisan support that year in 2012, because we're still in a rough economy, to create this entrepreneurial program. When I tell you the SEC was certainly not a fan of most of it, that's understating it. Silicon Valley was very much in favor of accredited investor, 506C. Nobody really cared about
which basically, just to recap, what that really means, accredited investor, is you have to have accumulated some wealth or have a position of high income, or else your money is no good.
Correct.
You can invest and we're not going to take it.
You can
And
be
it's illegal.
a business school professor at Yale, where Bob went, and if you don't have the net worth or the income, you can't play. And we've tried to change that as well, Bob, and not with great success. So it wasn't
at least the accredited, at least back in those days, if you were not accredited, there was virtually no ways that you would ever be able to invest in a small business.
That's correct. That is correct. And from a regular, if you were the head of the regulations, you too would say to yourself, okay, we're going to let wealthy people put their assets more at risk than people with lesser means, because the people with lesser means, if they get burned to too great an extent, they're going to become dependent on the state, and it's a problem. So I'm very sympathetic to the concept of how the regulations work. And what's great, I said there were 3 different versions of crowdfunding. Reg CF crowdfunding is that any American can invest up to $2,500 in any of these deals. And so I love that, because that's the American dream, even though it ends up not being out of 330 million Americans, I'd be shocked if 5 million people 10 years later have participated in Reg CF, because they know that it's more likely than not going to lose money. But you can go on any one of a number of Reg CF crowdfunding sites and look at these deals and invest in the local brewery or whatever it may be. And that was the most regulatory sensitive. So in direct answer to your question, it was imposed upon the SEC that they had to allow this to happen. But it took from 2012 to 2015 before we got the final sign-offs. So that's why we're 9 years into the cycle for Reg CF. And that's because most regulators are large law firm folks. They've never seen anything like this. And it just was offensive to them that we were going to let any American invest even a small sum of money. And so, like I said, I was down at the SEC 50 times in that 3-year period. I was in front of Congress all the time. And you had to be a believer. And everybody who was down there, it wasn't just me, it was a bunch of 20 and 30-year-olds who wanted to see this happen because they believed in the online capital formation business. And there are organizations that I'm still with today that are dedicated to making sure that this industry survives and thrives.
This show is being brought to you by our sponsor, Trueflation. Professional investors and economists, and probably any casual observers, know that government inflation statistics are only an approximation of what real inflation is. Not only that, but the government has a conflict of interest because high inflation can be so damaging to the economy, the deficit, and our $34 trillion in debt. Trueflation collects over 13 million pricing data points. Most are updated daily to reveal inflation with precision for asset managers, governments, companies, and the general public. Check them out at trueflation.com.
So that's Reg CF. Then to your point, there's what's called 506C, which is only for accredited investors. You don't have to do it through an online platform regulated by FINRA, where you can say, I have this great new idea, and email it to everybody you know, post it on LinkedIn, and you can only accept money from accredited investors that you verified through a third party actually are accredited. If they end up not being accredited, the burden's going to be on you and you're going to have a problem. Okay? Those are the only 2 I'm going to really talk about. I'm not going to talk about Reg A+, because it's really just a public offering by another name. But that was transformative, and thousands of companies have raised money with that. And the hope is that that's somewhat of a farm team to create a new class that will either get sold privately or maybe find their way into the public markets.
Are there any databases, consulting firms, evidence, or do you have a suspicion about how many of those thousands of companies that received crowdsourced funding, crowdfunding, would not have received any funding and never gotten off the ground?
That's a double-edged sword, right? Maybe they shouldn't have gotten money when you ask it that way. But so there's a very dear friend of mine is a guy named Woody Neese, who was really the pioneer on the idea of crowdfunding that walked the halls. and he's got an organization called Crowdfunding Capital Associates that you can go, called CCA, that you can go online and look at, and he's got a lot of the data. What we were focused on then, because you have to remember the Jobs Act was jobs, is he tracks how many jobs have been created as a result of all of these newly incorporated entities, and it's hundreds of thousands of new jobs. So it's worked. So Reg CF has worked. The SEC, to their credit, raised the maximum that you could raise in a Reg CF from $1 million to $5 million. Originally, they fought us tooth and nails. Back to your earlier point, we were debating every single aspect of the crowdfunding provisions with the staff, and one of them that got debated in Congress before is the SEC didn't want them to be able to raise $5 million, so it got knocked down to $1 million. But because there's been so little problems with the Reg CF crowdfunding industry, the SEC on its own bumped the amount from $1 million to $5 million, which is a huge benefit because it means if you're a successful entrepreneur, you can raise more money, even though there are ways of doing what we call hybrid offerings, where you're doing a Reg CF with a 506C offering so you can raise more money. So there are ways around these things typically. But to the SEC's credit, they did that. They recognized that the previous narrative that there was going to be all this fraud in the crowdfunding industry was erroneous, and truthfully, it was used to serve its own interest, even though the statistics didn't bear it out previously and certainly don't bear it out now.
Well, it's, that's comforting. There are plenty of people that think that people are bad, and there are plenty of people that think people are good. And it's nice to know that when an industry gets going and thousands of companies get funded by probably millions of people, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That the incidence of criminal activity is small. Any idea how small that is?
Almost statistically insignificant. I mean,
Wow.
Less than like 1%. So here's why, and this is why I always believed it's through a regulated portal. Number one, so they're like a mini broker dealer, and they have rules and responsibilities as to how they onboard an investor. Now, a lot of the times where a regulator is unhappy with a capital formation process is that they believe that investors have not been told the correct story. They're sold a bill of goods. Well, in an online environment, it's all digitally recorded. So you can show whether or not you did it or properly or not. And FINRA is regulating the crowdfunding platforms so they can dictate or monitor how it's being done if there are enough complaints to shut it down. And it's just intuitive that there's no way the SEC would have raised the amount from 1 to 5 if they weren't very statistically comfortable that there weren't a lot of complaints coming in. Now the cry is to go from 5 to 10, and to raise the maximum amount people invest in a deal. And so the industry, and you can, is it okay if I mention a couple of the sites for people to check out?
Sure.
WeFunder is one of them. There's one in Texas. Then there's an accredited crowdfunding site for people who want Israeli technologies called Our Crowd. That's not for Reg CF because it's international. It's for accredited investors. And I'm not saying that the results, Bob, have been outstanding, because I think we just don't know that. It's worse probably than the venture model, right? Where you're going to have 1 or 2 successes that make up for the rest in the venture model. Here, because you're not going after the moonshots, otherwise they would go the traditional venture route. You're probably going to have some adverse selection, but a lot of these deals are also structured with debt, particularly in the real estate crowdfunding. And you just get a return. You can go to Realty Mogul and look at that website for that. So the point you're making, which is, it used to be everybody was excluded from these deals unless you happen to know the entrepreneur and you happen to meet them at the right point in time and they offered you some part of their deal. Now you can go on these sites if you like consumer products or beverages or software deals or teams, and participate in these things more proactively. And I think that's welcome. Even if the results are as poor as friends and family financing. I don't know about you, but I have rarely gotten my money back on those deals. So this isn't going to be any worse.
No, that's the thing. And the world, in order to make progress, you must take risk. You have to work hard. You have to be able to make a bet and a prediction and participate and contribute, because a lot of times you put money in to family and friends or whatever round, no matter what, it still may take a little work. But the whole idea is,
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, the economy does well when small business people are active and interacting, and money can flow.
So let's do two more things. Two more things that we know. So one is, well, I'll get back to SPACs in a second, but if you go on the CCA website, you'll see the amount of empowerment for women and minorities, which venture does not give money to, has been significant in crowdfunding, all forms of crowdfunding. Next, geographically, even though the money is always going to skew California, New York, Texas, Massachusetts, the dispersion geographically has been very healthy in many other states. So particularly for entrepreneurship, that's an outstanding thing.
If you like this video, please hit like, subscribe, and leave any comments you might have. You might also want to check out some of my other interviews. We try to dig into the problems that make Americans so pessimistic about the next generation, but we also interview people whose work doesn't get the headlines, but they make life better for society every day. Given humanity's steady progress over the last 275 years, it's likely that there's never been a better time to have been born than today. Join us for perspectives on today's challenges and opportunities.